In 3019 of the Third Age, deep beneath the misty mountains, an ancient evil stirred in the darkness. The Fellowship of the Ring sought passage through Moria, an abandoned dwarven kingdom, hoping to cross the mountains unseen. This decision led to one of the most devastating battles in Middle-earth's history, a clash between Gandalf the Grey and a demon of shadow and flame known as Durin's Bane. This battle had its roots in the earliest days of Middle-earth, when Morgoth still ruled from his northern fortress of Angband. Among his most terrible servants were the Balrogs, fallen Maia, who had once served the Valar in shaping the world, before Morgoth seduced them to darkness. These demons towered above the tallest warriors, their flaming whips and swords proving fatal even to the mightiest elf lords. Entire cities fell before their onslaught. And in Utumno, he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame. Balrogs they were named in Middle-earth in later days. The Balrogs' reign of terror continued unchecked for centuries, as Morgoth's power grew and his shadow lengthened over Middle-earth. Elves and men alike suffered under their onslaught, their mightiest warriors falling before the demons' fiery whips and swords. In the face of such overwhelming might, hope seemed lost. But in the final years of the First Age, the Valar finally answered the desperate pleas of elves and men. Their divine host marched against Morgoth's fortress, determined to end his reign of terror over Middle-earth. In those apocalyptic battles that reshaped continents and drowned ancient lands, most of the Balrogs perished defending their dark master's stronghold. But a few of these ancient terrors escaped the wreck of Angband, fleeing into the deep places of the earth where they would slumber for ages uncounted. One such survivor made its way beneath the misty mountains, where it slept undisturbed in the lightless depths. 1,000 years passed in silence. Then, in the year 1980 of the Third Age, the dwarves came to these mountains and built Khazad-dûm, their greatest kingdom. Their halls and mines stretched for leagues beneath 3 mighty peaks, delving ever deeper in pursuit of mithril, the precious silver metal worth 10 times its weight in gold. The dwarves' mining operations expanded year by year, following mithril's precious veins deeper into the stone. Great forges shaped the metal into treasures beyond measure, driving their appetite for more. With each new tunnel carved, their picks echoed closer to the ancient darkness that waited below. The sound of their mining finally penetrated chambers that had known only silence since the First Age. When the dwarves' picks broke through into that ancient cavern in 1980 of the Third Age, they awakened an evil beyond their darkest dreams. The Balrog emerged like a storm of shadow and flame, tore through the deepest mining halls, leaving death in its wake. Within a year, King Durin VI gathered their mightiest warriors and met the demon in the Second Deep, where the creature's flames turned ancient columns to slag. The king's legendary axe, which had cleaved dragons and giants, shattered against the Balrog's burning form. Before his guards could reach him, Durin VI fell beneath the demon's fiery whip, his armor melting like candle wax. The death of their king earned the creature its grim name, Durin's Bane. His son, Nine. I gathered their strongest warriors to fight back. The attempt failed, and Nine joined his father in death. After losing both kings to the demon's might, despair finally broke the courage of Durin's folk. The surviving dwarves abandoned their ancient home, taking with them only what they could carry on their backs. Behind them, their greatest kingdom fell into darkness, and Khazad-dûm became known as Moria, the Black Pit. For over 1,000 years, those who dared its shadows never returned. The dwarves tell no tale, but even as mithril was the foundation of their wealth, so also it was their destruction. They delved too greedily and too deep, and disturbed that from which they fled, Durin's Bane. Of what they brought to light, the orcs have gathered nearly all, and given it in tribute to Sauron, who covets it. The being who would face this demon came from similar origins, but chose a different path. Gandalf, like the Balrog, was one of the Maia. The Valar sent him to Middle-earth as one of 5 wizards, known as the Istari, to unite and guide the free peoples against evil. But they operated under strict rules. They could not match power with power directly. This limitation shaped Gandalf's actions throughout his time in Middle-earth. He traveled among all peoples, from the greatest lords to the humblest hobbits, building alliances and kindling hope against the growing darkness. Yet now, deep in Moria, he faced a direct confrontation with a being of his own order, one that had fallen into darkness ages ago. Now these ancient powers would meet again in darkness. One sought to protect and guide, working within careful limits to preserve the world. The other knew no such restraint, its might unmarred by restriction or mercy. In January 3019, the Fellowship of the Ring entered Moria with cautious steps. They had no choice. The mountain pass of Caradhras had defeated them with cruel storms, and enemies watched the other paths. Gandalf led them through the vast darkness of the dwarven kingdom, his staff providing the only light in halls that hadn't known brightness for 1,000 years. For 2 days they moved in tense silence until they faced an onslaught of orcs and a mighty cave troll. Arrows whistled through stale air. Swords clashed against crude armor. The trolls' roars shook dust from ancient rafters. Then the noise of their battle awakened something far worse in the depths below. The orcs recognized the approaching doom. They fled in blind panic, abandoning their attack as shadows grew deeper and a heat like a furnace blast rolled through the corridors. Gandalf alone understood the true nature of what approached. His hand tightened on his staff as he felt the presence of another Maia, one whose power had been corrupted by Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. Durin's Bane emerged from the shadows like a nightmare given form. The Balrog's massive frame rose twice the height of a tall man, darkness flowing around it like water, flames erupting from within. Its weapons spoke of its terrible nature. In one hand it wielded a blade crafted from living fire, in the other a many-thonged whip that crackled with supernatural heat. Around its form, the air itself wavered and distorted from the intensity of its heat. Gandalf stood alone before the demon on the narrow bridge. His staff blazed with white fire, pushing back the Balrog's clinging shadows. At his side, the sword Glamdring shed its own pale light, its ancient Gondolin-forged blade eager to taste enemy flesh once more. "You cannot pass. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. The Balrog halted on the bridge. From its shadow erupted a blade of red fire. The demon raised its great whip, the thongs cracking against the stone. Glamdring answered with a ringing clash as Gandalf parried the flaming sword. The bridge trembled. Fire and shadow billowed around them as the Balrog's whip hissed through the air. Gandalf's staff flared brighter, holding the darkness at bay, while Glamdring met each strike of the fire sword. The chamber echoed with the thunder of their exchange. Blade against blade, light against shadow, neither giving ground on the narrow span. Seeing no path to victory in direct combat, Gandalf struck the bridge itself with his staff, channeling power into the ancient stone. Cracks spread like lightning through the stonework. The section beneath the Balrog's feet gave way, sending the demon plummeting into the abyss. But in its fall, the creature's whip lashed out one final time, its burning thongs wrapped around Gandalf's knees, dragging him into the darkness with his foe. As the Fellowship watched in horror, both vanished into the lightless depths. In the lightless depths where both had fallen, the battle raged on. Below the bridge of Khazad-dûm, they plummeted for untold hours through caverns no dwarf had mapped. When they finally struck ground, The impact shattered an ancient chamber floor, sending them crashing through multiple levels of the abandoned kingdom and into realms far deeper than any dwarf had ever delved. For days beyond counting in that timeless dark, they fought through tunnels that had never known the touch of pick or chisel. These were not the works of Durin's folk, but older passages gnawed by nameless things that even Sauron himself had never known, creatures more ancient than the first Dark Lord. Through these primordial depths, their battle raged, Gandalf clutching and striking while the Balrog fought with desperate fury until at last it fled upward, seeking escape from these eldest and darkest of places. We fought far under the living earth, where time is not counted. Ever he clutched me, and ever I hewed him, till at last he fled into dark tunnels. They were not made by Durin's folk, Gimli, son of Glóin. Far, far below the deepest delvings of the dwarves, the world is gnawed by nameless things. Even Sauron knows them not. They are older than he. The combat drove them back into Moria's known depths. They clashed through narrow mining tunnels of the Second Deep, where the Balrog's massive form scraped against walls and shattered ancient support beams. Its flames lit up chambers that had known only darkness for 1,000 years, while Glamdring's pale light answered each burst of fire with its own gleam. In the flooded halls, the Balrog's heat turned black water to steam, filling vast chambers with scalding clouds. They passed through forgotten treasuries where centuries of dwarven craft lay abandoned, the gold itself melting in pools where the demon's footsteps fell. By the 8th day, their combat had turned upward, driving them toward the mountain's peak. The battle led them to the endless stair, where the dwarves had carved thousands of steps spiraling up through the mountain's heart. The Balrog's wings spread wide as it took to the vertical path, leaping dozens of steps at a time. Though it could not truly fly, each bound carried it higher, while streams of fire rained down on its pursuer. Gandalf matched the demon's ascent. His staff blazed brighter with each step, its light pushing back the darkness that tried to swallow him. When the Balrog's whip descended, he turned it aside with Glamdring's blade, sending cascades of sparks into the abyss below. The air thinned as they climbed higher, but neither showed signs of tiring. Their battle finally burst out onto Durin's tower atop Ziraxigil. Below them stretched the stark winter landscape, endless peaks crowned with snow, valleys still dark with night's shadows. The Balrog's presence transformed the tower's peak, turning snow to steam wherever it stepped. For 2 days and nights, they fought atop the mountain. The Balrog's flames reached new heights in the open air, turning stone to slag beneath its feet. Its whip carved glowing arcs through the darkness, leaving trails of fire that lingered in the air. Gandalf answered with lightning and thunder, his power shaking the mountain to its roots. On the 10th day since their fall, Gandalf, pushed beyond mortal limits, gathered his remaining strength. In that moment, he set aside all restrictions placed upon him as an Istari. Power flowed through him, pure and devastating. The peak of Ziraxigil trembled under the weight of their gathered might. Their final clash split the darkness like a new dawn. Glamdring met the Balrog's burning blade one last time. Thunder and flame wrestled. Then Gandalf's power struck home, true and devastating. The Balrog's flame guttered like a candle in a hurricane. Its massive form toppled backward, tumbling down the mountain's face. But what would they say in song? Those that looked up from afar thought that the mountain was crowned with storm. Thunder they heard, and lightning, they said, smote upon Celebdil and leaped back, broken into tongues of fire. Is not that enough? A great smoke rose about us, vapor and steam. Ice fell like rain. I threw down my enemy, and he fell from the high place and broke the mountainside where he smote it in his ruin. Then darkness took me, and I strayed out of thought and time, and I wandered far on roads that I will not tell. Victory extracted its price. Gandalf, having spent every measure of his strength, collapsed upon the peak. His physical form, pushed beyond its limits by wielding such power, failed him. There he lay upon the frozen summit, and his spirit departed from the circles of the world. The battle's aftermath rippled through Middle-earth. Durin's Bane, one of the last Balrogs who had once burned Gondolin to ash and slaughtered the mightiest of the Noldor, now lay broken on the frozen slopes of Xirac-Sigil. Though orcs and other dark creatures still haunted Moria's depths, its greatest terror was no more. The ancient halls of Khazad-dûm stood silent, awaiting whatever fate the coming age might bring. While the Balrog's body lay broken in the valley, Gandalf's spirit wandered beyond the circles of the world for 20 days. The Valar themselves intervened, judging that his sacrifice in confronting this ancient evil had earned him greater authority. When they returned him to life, Gwaihir the Windlord found him naked upon the mountain peak and bore him to Lothlorien. There, Galadriel clothed him in white, for he was no longer Gandalf the Grey. His staff now shone with bright light, and the power he wielded was greater than before. The battle between Gandalf and Durin's Bane still stirs intense debate among Middle-earth scholars, revealing deeper truths about power and its limitations. At its heart, Gandalf's display of power was a dance between restraint and necessity that unfolded over those 10 fateful days. In the chamber of Mazarbul, witnesses saw only glimpses of his true strength. On the bridge of Khazad-dûm, he wielded but a fraction of his power. Yet by the battle's end atop Xirac-Sigil, his might shook the very foundations of the mountain. This gradual transformation speaks the nature of the Istari and their divine mandate. When the Valar sent their emissaries to Middle-earth, they bound them with careful restrictions, remembering all too well the devastating cost of direct intervention. The War of Wrath had torn Beleriand asunder, drowning entire kingdoms beneath the waves, a harsh lesson in the dangers of unleashing too much power in Middle-earth. Yet, as the battle wore on, the bonds that held back Gandalf's power seemed to loosen, like chains falling away link by link. Lightning answered his call. At the end, his power could split the sky. Some suggest that the very length of the conflict forced this change, that each day of desperate combat required him to shed another layer of restriction, like a warrior casting aside pieces of heavy armor to survive. The Balrog itself presents another mystery. In the First Age, its kind were terror incarnate, capable of devastating entire cities. Gondolin, which had withstood Morgoth's searches for centuries, fell in a single day when the Balrogs led the assault. Their lord Gothmog led armies that brought doom to the mightiest of the Noldor. Feanor, greatest of all the Eldar, fell before the host of Balrogs in battle, while Fingon, High King of the Noldor, met his end at Gothmog's hand during the terrible Battle of the Unnumbered Tears. Only Ecthelian's desperate sacrifice, driving his helm's spike through Gothmog's chest as they plunged together into death, ended the Balrog Lord's reign of terror. Yet Durin's Bane seemed a shadow of this ancient might. Though it proved terrible enough to drive the dwarves from Khazad-dûm and slay both Durin Six and his son Nine the Fur, it never displayed the overwhelming force its kind once wielded. Perhaps its long slumber beneath the mountains had dulled its power, like a blade left too long in its sheath. The dwarves, though mighty, were not the equal of First Age elf lords, yet they resisted longer than Gondolin ever could. This diminished state might explain how Gandalf, even bound by the Valar's restrictions, could match it in combat in the beginning. Or perhaps the Valar had watched Melkor, mightiest among them, fall into darkness through pride and the desire for dominion. They had witnessed how unchecked power had corrupted not just their own kind, even the Maia, how Sauron, once a radiant spirit of craft who delighted in forging the raw matter of creation in Aule's halls, twisted his gifts into tools of ruins. The Balrogs, who once sang in the celestial choirs that shaped the world, transformed into creatures of shadow and flame in their pursuit of might. Each fall from grace taught the same lesson, that power, even wielded with the noblest intentions, could seduce and corrupt the divine themselves. And so Gandalf's gradual awakening of power was divine wisdom rather than tactical choice, a delicate balance between necessary force and catastrophic might, written in lightning and shadow upon Ziraxagil's peak. And so concludes our journey through one of the darkest chapters of Middle-earth's Third Age, a desperate battle between ancient powers that shook the roots of the Misty Mountains. It leaves us with haunting questions. How many more of these ancient terrors might still linger in the deep places of the world, waiting for some unfortunate pick or spade to awaken them? Could there be other Balrogs who escaped the wreck of Thangorodrim, slumbering in tunnels and caverns far from the sight of elves or men? What are your thoughts? Share your speculations in the comments, and remember, in the struggle against darkness, every light matters, no matter how small.